Hello and welcome to the very first edition of Global Dialogue in 2023. I'm Shireen Bhana. I couldn't have asked for a more perfect start. Joining me today is Satya Nadella. Satya, what a pleasure. Thank you very much. A happy new year to you. 3 years ago, February of 2020 is the last conversation you and I had in person, and how much has changed in the world, and it's so good to have you back here in India. And that's where I want to start. About India specifically. You said you're super long on India and you have 3 reasons why you believe that to be the case. But I want to understand from you, what is fueling that optimism at this point in time? And let me throw back the question that your colleague Anant Maheshwari asked. Is India going to be the data capital of the world?
No, first of all, thank you so much, Shireen, for having me, and Happy New Year to you and your viewers. It's great to be back in India, and it's very palpable, the energy, the dynamism. And to your point, there are a couple of things, right? One is, when I look at what's happening in the economy today, at the growth rates of 6–7%, it's clear that by 2030, India will go from being number 5 to maybe number 3 as a global economy. It's already a hotbed for startups. I think it's number 2 in the world in terms of startups. But the 3 data points that I sort of look at, given our vantage point, is when it comes to GitHub, and where we see all of the world's software developers, India is number 2 already. And in fact, when it comes to AI projects, interestingly enough, India is number 1. And so you can't, if you're sort of, this next phase is going to be an AI age, you have to be long on India, because already these developers, that means, are going to impact every part of the Indian society and Indian industry. The other one I'd also say, Shireen, is skilling. On LinkedIn, one of the data points which sort of strikes me as just phenomenal is people taking pride in upskilling themselves in India is double the global rate. Right? All that, right? It's not about just the school you went to. It's about the skills you're picking up every day. And that's all translating ultimately into Indian growth and Indian productivity. So these are things that make me very, very optimistic about India.
So let me tie down the macro to the micro then in terms of Microsoft's strategy. You also said that you believe the cloud era is going to be a game changer as far as the India opportunity is concerned. What is that going to translate into in terms of investments, in terms of what you intend to do here out of India?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, I've grown up, in Microsoft through, I would say, 3 big shifts, right? The PC revolution, the client server, and cloud. We had some penetration of PCs in India. We had some penetration of client servers. But now, when it comes to cloud, it's a complete night and day story, right? When I look at our growth rate of consumption, the thing is, we are investing our capital to ensure that cloud is available across the country. We already have 3 data center regions. We are opening a 4th. But what it means ultimately is, through Azure, every customer in India is able to do 3 things. One is, take any application of theirs. They're able to build something that's 10x, 100x even in some cases, more efficient than what they did when they were doing their own servers in their own data center. Second, it's more energy efficient. It's something like 80–90% more energy efficient to run the same application in a data center that we operate versus operating on your own. And in fact, the other thing is demand, right? If you have cycles of demand, you even hedge against that by moving to the cloud, because you're only consuming when you have demand. So I think ultimately the working capital and all forms of capital of any industry in India are going to be improved, because thanks to sort of both the world-class technology we produce, but also the local investments we are making in our own capital. So I'm very, very bullish on cloud. And then if you sort of see the next phase of the cloud is AI plus cloud, that's another place where I think every business inside of India can benefit from.
Speaking of startups, and you talked about the opportunity that the startup ecosystem presents, are we likely to see greater collaboration between Microsoft and India's startup ecosystem?
100%. So in fact, we have a program called the Founders Hub, which is being used now by 2,500 odd startups here. And we already see everybody from whether it is Lambda Test that I talked about this morning, which is an organization that's doing test automation out of India, and everyone around the world is using them, or Oyo, or many others who are already using cloud technology to be able to innovate. So I'm very, very excited about whether a startup that's starting today will automatically start on GitHub and use the GitHub tools to be more productive, or startups that are scaling not only in India, but also maybe to going abroad. and we are a partner for all of them.
You know, the last question on India before I talk to you about the rest of the world and what's going on there. The digital public good, that stack, and of course it's got a lot of interest, it's got a lot of attention from people, including from yourself. What is the most exciting aspect of that story, and how do you see it evolving in the future?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the most tremendously unique things that's happening in India, which is that fundamental recognition that if this next stage is about digital, not only do you need private sector innovation in digital, but you also need, just like how in every other place public goods exist, roads and other infrastructure that allow the economy to flourish. Similarly, in digital, what's the moral equivalent? And India is led with the identity system, the payment infrastructure. Now that payment infrastructure is scaling into e-commerce, into rest of the financial transactions, into healthcare. Even one of the partnerships we have is with the Ministry of Electronics and Communications here around their Indian language Bhashani program, which is fantastic. It's kind of basically saying every Indian company and every Indian citizen should have access to AI models that sort of democratize language. So that means I should be able to translate from Hindi to Telugu to Tamil to Kannada or what have you without any impedance in any application, and that as a public good. And that to me is a very enlightened set of policies by the government. And also great consumption and usage by the private sector to make the Indian economy and society that much more productive.
Let me talk to you about the global economy, and again tie up the macro to the micro. Inflation, recession fears across most parts of the world at this point in time. Interest rates continue to move higher. Is it all flashing red on your dashboard? Is there any sign of green at all?
I mean, it's clearly many, many challenges right now around the world. In fact, India is probably the exception. There are parts, India, Middle East, Latin America, some of the other parts of Asia are the things that are green. And I think Europe and the United States are going to be challenged. I mean, the United States, not yet, but I think 23 will be much harder. So yes, we want to be very, very cautious in our outlook in the immediate term. Long term, I'm very bullish of us coming out, right? Because there are two cycles, I think, Shireen, that are happening. One is a supply cycle that's a very long cycle. That's a secular shift. We're not going back to 2010, 2011, because of the geopolitics as well as essentially the rejiggering of supply chains. I think we're going to have a supply cycle that's going to persist. The demand cycle is going to be a classic demand cycle. There will be some economies that will go through a recession. Some may be deep, some may be minor. And then inside of that, there will be pockets of growth like India. And so I think for us as a global company, we're not going to be immune from what's happening in the macro. We will have to also get our own sort of operational focus on making sure our expenses are in line with our revenue growth, manage the short term, but make sure we're investing for the long term.
Well, as you pointed out, and many CEOs are now talking about having to respond to the new economic reality. What is that going to mean, not just for Microsoft, but for the tech sector in general? Are we likely to see more pain, especially when it comes to retrenching, downsizing, margins going to be under pressure, guidance going to be a downside risk to that as well?
I think overall, quite frankly, whether it's for us as Microsoft or the tech sector, it's going to be very, very important to look inside and say, are we as efficient as we need to be competitive? I mean, at the end of the day, just because we are a technology company doesn't mean that we are the most efficient at what we do. And so as the paradigm has changed, as the bar has risen, we have to measure ourselves with the new bar. So definitely and also the growth picture has changed. We have to have operating expenses that need to be aligned. So definitely we are going to look at all of that, and it means that we're not sort of immune, as I said, to the global changes. But the one interesting thing to your point, though, is tech industry employment is not tech employment.
Yeah.
That, I think, is the key divergence that needs to be well understood, because that, I think, is positive, by the way, for the tech industry long term. Because if you look at it, overall tech jobs is actually increased. The tech jobs now are coming in financial services, in energy companies, in retail, manufacturing, and that's healthy because in the long run, all those employees in all those industries are going to consume more tech infrastructure, right? When we think about our cloud business, long term we're bullish because of the fact that there's more employment outside of the tech industry. of technical talent. And so that's, I think, what we are banking on.
No, I think you underscore the labor market resilience aspect. But, what we've seen, especially as far as the stock markets are concerned, and I know that CEOs often say that don't focus on what the markets are telling you, but they seem to be suggesting that there is significant pain in store for the tech sector. How do you read what's happening with the way that the markets have corrected, specifically the tech stocks, and what that signals?
For me, look, I'm never the one who would ever say ignore the market, because the markets are smarter than us all. I think they are reflecting on is, look, where is the growth coming from? And how should we think about normalizing for that growth? And so I think stock performance, economic performance are not exactly the same. But the key for us as a tech industry, I always go back as a percentage of GDP. The simple question to ask is, do we think tech spend will increase or decrease? If we believe software and digital infrastructure is going to be important in construction, in energy, in manufacturing, long term, then you have to be long on tech industry. But will we have to go through our own cycles around productivity? Absolutely, like anybody else. But that's at least my perspective. I wouldn't look, the only reason why I would say ignore the short term is because in the long run, we would be fine with demand, but in the short run, what we have to focus on is our own productivity and making sure we are at the efficient
How would you quantify short term and long run?
I would say the next 2 years are probably going to be the most challenging, because after all, we did have a lot of acceleration during the pandemic, and there is some amount of normalization of that demand. And on top of it, there is a real recession in large parts of the world. And so the combination of pull forward and recession means we will have to adjust. And that will cycle through the demand cycle and, in fact, come out of it with what can be another massive growth cycle for the tech industry.
Speaking of the massive growth cycle, you talked about the emergence of the reasoning engine, which you believe is going to provide the sort of next leg of growth, so to speak. How long before you see that as being a key inflection point? What excites you there? In light of everything that's happening around us, question marks still on use cases as far as the metaverse is concerned, crypto is going through their own set of problems. How do you make sense of what's happening with tech at this point in time?
Yeah, I think it's also showtime for the tech industry, quite frankly, to take some of the technologies that we've talked about and translate them, as you said, to use cases that make a real difference. So what's happening in AI is really compelling, these large language models, the excitement around ChatGPT, which was all trained on Azure. We're excited about our OpenAI partnership. It's just the beginning, I think, of this next generation of AI, where we've built very unique infrastructure. In fact, the best AI infrastructure is on Azure, which trained models like GPT. But here's an interesting thing. We introduced GitHub Copilot last year. Already 40–50% of the code for any developer who's writing code is being generated by AI. That means it's making them that much more productive. So if you take that concept, to your point about a real use case, a copilot for a software developer, which, by the way, was the knowledge work that we always thought was at the frontier, if they can be 30%, 40%, 50% more productive, then imagine what that could mean. Like, we are also working with many others, like whether it's Autodesk or Adobe and others, to say, okay, how can we introduce Copilot when you're designing, some mechanical part or whatever else? And to me, knowledge work, information work, frontline work, software development, all can be transformed by AI. Metaverse as well, I think ultimately presence, right? When I look at Teams and video meetings, they've gone through a massive change. Presence has always been, to me, the killer app. What is the next phase of video meetings with avatars, with ability to transcend distance? So I think some of these use cases have to be still further matured and developed. But AI, as exemplified by what is happening with GitHub Copilot or Power Apps, the other one where a citizen developer, i.e. a no-code, low-code developer, can take a sketch that you and I can draw on a piece of napkin, take a photo, and translate that into an app that they deploy. That's tremendous, right? So this is somebody who's a domain expert able to do IT work. That's thanks to the power of AI. So some of these use cases are rapidly emerging.
So in light of the use cases that you just spoke about, where do you believe we're going to see the next leg of disruption as well as displacement?
I think the next phase, if I had to sort of say, if you say mobile and cloud was the last paradigm, the next really is going to be AI. And that's going to happen in the next, I would say, 2 to 3 years is going to be as big You know, it'll be more like I take it back to 2007, 2008 is when cloud and mobile became big. I think we are in that phase when it comes to AI.
You know, let me end then by asking you, Satya, we're at the start of a new year, and, you know, like everybody else, I'm sure that there is some degree of introspection, audit, etc., that you're going through as well. As you look back at the experience of the pandemic, and I know that, you know, you've been a big believer in empathetic leadership, and you brought that into the CEO lexicon well before the pandemic as well. How do you sort of look at life, work in the context of what the pandemic has taught us?
I think that's a great question, Shireen. To me, I think one of the fundamental things the pandemic perhaps brought into focus was we all, collectively as a global community, had a tail event impact us all. We all were anxious about our own health, the health of our family, friends, communities, and we coped with it as a community, right? The vaccines came thanks to some great innovation in the pharma industry. The healthcare professionals were heroes everywhere. They sort of were the people at the front lines, you know, helping us get through it. The essential services, whether it's in retail or manufacturing, it's sort of unbelievable to see the world even rally through these tough circumstances. The biggest lesson I've learned through all of this, going back to even leadership, is that all of us will have tail events. There may not be one global tail event, but each of us, life happens. And the question is, the next time one of those tail events happens, who around us, whether it's at the workplace or in our home, who's going to help us through it? And I think we have a better sense of it, right? When somebody comes in with a difficulty, I think we will be more empathetic, having gone through the pandemic collectively as a global community.
Satya Nadella, it's an absolute pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us here on CNBC TV18 on the Global Dialogue. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to having you back in India sooner. Thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Shireen. Every time I've come and talked to you, you've talked about how these digital public goods are the most needed in order to have real impact in the world, and especially where it's most needed. And can you maybe describe where are we with it? What is uniqueness you see in India, and what is happening in India around digital public goods?
I think we're just halfway on the journey, Satya. Basically, the big picture, big vision is how do we create a digital-first economy and society, leveraging the power of modern digital technology and all the things you talked about to actually improve the lives of people, to bring economic growth, to make it more equitable, more inclusive, open access, and really allow people to use their own data to move forward. So the philosophy behind this, and it began with Aadhaar, 1.3 billion people, 80 million authentications a day. Then NPCI built UPI, which does 7 to 8 billion transactions a month. Then we have the account aggregator system, which will allow democratization of lending, where anybody can borrow money using their own data. So data becomes information collateral. We have the AI stuff, working with OpenAI and so on. Then there's ONDC, which is going to completely disaggregate e-commerce and allow suppliers, consumers, and delivery agents all to work through an open protocol. I mean, there's a ton of things going on. But fundamentally, how do we create a digital-first country transformation? That's really what this is all about.
Yeah, and it's pretty unique to see it. I mean, yeah. And quite frankly, I mean, and a big thank you to you. I mean, like, none of this, always things need a start. And then, of course, it also requires all of the nurturing for it to scale. And what surprised me, quite frankly, is the scale numbers you were. And the fact that one builds on the other, right? It's kind of one of those things where it all feels like a grand plan. Was it a grand plan?
Well, parts of it were, but parts of it we learned along the way. And I think the important thing was there's a group of people within the government, the Prime Minister's the biggest supporter of this, and he always says, why can't we get it done by next week? So that's a bit difficult to meet him because he sets these bad, these hard...
You keep postponing.
Yeah, I said, hang on. And then we have great talent in the system, technocrats, volunteers. So it's actually a very loose coalition which has put this together. But what is your feeling? Do you think this is something which has global applicability?
No, 100%. First of all, I think that, I had a chance even to have a brief conversation about this with the Prime Minister yesterday. To your point, his vision and even all the programs, the yojanas, and India Stack. In fact, the thing that I'm realizing is it's the magic of India Stack, because everything needs a feedback loop.
That's right.
It's the yojanas and the policies and the technology stack co-evolving.
That's right.
That's just a virtuous cycle that is unlike anything I've seen, and it's just tremendous. And to your point, I absolutely think both of these as perhaps the greatest contributions that India can make to the world, quite frankly.
But tell me, you a few years back, you took $1 billion bet on OpenAI, and I think a lot of people said, what's wrong with this guy? And today, you're looking phenomenal. So can you tell us about your vision on that and what made you take that big bet?
Yeah, I mean, it's phenomenal, Nandan, to see what's happening with these foundational models, right? The fundamental, thing is we're seeing emergent scale effects. GPT-3 to 3.5 and what comes next are all really exciting to see. And we're obviously thrilled with our partnership with OpenAI. As I said, in fact, one of the first things that really helped us was build, quite frankly, cloud infrastructure. I've always, in fact, when I think about, the one thing we all have to stay grounded is in order to build AI, you need the cloud.
That's right.
But you need a cloud that is very different, right? In fact, having grown up all my life in the cloud, the types of infrastructure that is required to do this large-scale AI model training is very different, right? And the network becomes very, very important, as I was mentioning, how these models are much more synchronous, how they cohere. It has to be, that workload shapes the infrastructure. That feedback loop has been very, very helpful for us building, both on the inference side and on the training side. So then the question is, and I'm not going to say that this is the last big innovation. There will be a lot of model architecture innovation. There may be even new, more efficient breakthroughs on what is, what can be done. And we want to keep a very open mind to all of that. But we also want to really ride this wave in a very aggressive way. But what's the intuition? If you ask me what's the intuition behind it, it's a simple, if you sort of take one of these large models and let's say train it on all of the math equations, right? It gets good at math. But then let's say we train it on all the math equations and all of Kannada literature. It'll get better at math.
Okay.
Why is that? It's because that's what, we as humans do even, right? When we go to school, it's not like we only learn math. We learn language, we learn history.
That's a great point.
And the general circuit sort of gets good, and the general circuit gets good at specific domain tasks. So it's kind of the same intuition, where here it shows up differently with scale effects.
So you had that intuition 4 or 5 years back.
As you said, look, in technology, it's all about being able to bet on great teams with real vision and the ability to sort of back them to the hilt. And that's what I saw in Sam and his group, and it has been fantastic. And so, they're true believers in it, and they along with even all of the folks at Microsoft Research and so on have done some phenomenal work to get us to a place where now it's showtime, though. It's not about just, again, going back to a little bit of, I think, your coaching to all of us. It's saying technology is great, but let's now make it that it is really useful in the context of its social impact. So I think that's the phase. In
fact, our commitment is, by the time we come 1 year later, you'll see real-world applications using all the technology, GPT chat, multilingual, in the hands of 1 billion people. That's our mission.